It's hard to find places on Earth that are unexplored, but there are still dense jungles and remote mountain ranges that pose a challenge for even the bravest explorers. From secret holes in the Earth to underwater cities, here are some of the most mysterious, lost worlds on Earth. If you have an adventurous spirit, you're going to love this one.
Is Earth really hollow?
From the first days of human civilization, people have told stories about a secret world beneath the surface of the Earth. The Greeks believed it was a place of darkness filled with the souls of the dead. Mesoamerican cultures believed the same thing. The underground has always been seen as a world of spirits and demons. Then, in the 17th century, scientists started to get a different idea of what might be underneath the surface.
They began to speculate that the Earth could be hollow. Edmund Halley was the first major scientist to propose the notion in 1692. He believed the world to be entirely hollow. Within that hollow space, Halley envisioned a world not entirely unlike our own. He thought it was full of exciting creatures and strange plants. He even suggested there could be tribal humans, similar, if not identical, to the ones above ground. The idea was that a source of light was within the Earth to grant these beings life and warmth. In 1818, John Cleve Symmes Jr. declared the Earth hollow and promised he would find an entrance. John had fought bravely in the War of 1812. He tried to become a trader after the war, but failed epically. He still had a great thirst for adventure, though, and wanted to prove himself to the world. He proposed mounting an expedition to the North Pole. Once there, John would discover a hidden entrance into the hollow of the Earth. He believed there were several of these holes located around the world, and that they were the only way to enter the inner globe. John never found one of those holes. While there were many supporters of John and his theory, science was advancing rapidly in the 19th century. The public mostly greeted him with the same derision that the public greets flat earthers with today. John gave lectures and published letters about the secret world within the Earth, but then he died in 1849 without finding proof. Although it's a fun notion, it's scientifically impossible. Inside the Earth are several layers of solid rock and minerals, and at the core is a dense metal ball that's unbelievably hot.
And now for number 7. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to J. Berry and Michael Johns in Wales. Hi! Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel and spending time with us. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this.
The Lost Underworld. Underneath a church in Mexico, archaeologists have found the entrance to a secret underworld. Scientists use scans to identify the existence of a subterranean labyrinth from the days of the mighty Zapotec civilization. According to local legends, the Zapotec constructed a series of tunnels underneath where the Church of San Pablo currently stands. The Zapotec believed they were carving passageways leading to the underworld. But when the Spanish arrived and destroyed the Zapotec society, the labyrinth was seen as a heresy. The Spanish were terrified of any tunnel that could lead to what they thought was an entrance to hell. It was two different superstitions, two different systems of belief, and they just couldn't coexist. In the 16th century, the Spanish built a Catholic church above the ancient labyrinth. They were hoping that God would protect them from the horrors below. It's remained sealed ever since. But now, archaeologists have found it. The tunnels are underneath the ancient city of Mitla, located in Oaxaca. This place served as the religious center for the Zapotec since the beginning of their reign around 600 BC. The researchers were able to create a three-dimensional model of the underground passages. There appears to be an enormous void directly underneath the church's main altar. They haven't explored the passageways yet, but can't wait to finally break ground. Soon, they will enter the lost world for the first time in 5 centuries. Would you be brave enough to venture inside tunnels once believed to take you to hell? Let me know in the comments. The Indonesian Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden has been discovered, and it's not where you might think. It's in the jungles of Indonesia's Papua province. Researchers have uncovered a lost world teeming with life forms that have either been presumed extinct or never even seen before. A team of 13 scientists spent a month surveying hundreds of thousands of hectares of wilderness in Indonesia's Foja Mountains. These mountains are located on the island of New Guinea on the Indonesian side of it. When the month was over, experts had identified 40 new species. They said the untouched patch of wilderness is as close to the Garden of Eden as possible in this day and age. It's not that unusual for scientists to find new species. It happens all the time, but not normally in such abundance. The unexplored area is within a misty series of mountains climbing 7,200 feet above sea level. Stephen Richards from the South Australian Museum said it's a snapshot of what the island looked like 50,000 years ago. The Lost World is a perfect example of a time before environmental destruction and hunting. It's an untouched paradise, one that people hopefully leave alone going forward. Just try to imagine a jungle without human influence. That was what the team stumbled upon here. The creatures had no reason to be fearful of humans and acted very strangely. Scientists were able to pick up echidnas, which are egg-laying mammals, and carry them back to camp to be studied. The creatures had never seen humans before and were more intrigued than afraid. It was the first time, at least that scientists know about, that Homo sapiens entered this patch of mountainous forest. In terms of newly discovered creatures, new species included birds, frogs, and butterflies. Scientists also found a golden tree kangaroo, which was thought to have been hunted to extinction. The lands of the Great Wall. Scientists from the University of Jerusalem have just used drones to map a 460-mile section of the Great Wall of China along the border of Mongolia. In doing so, they've exposed a lost world from the days of Genghis Khan and those who tried to keep him out of China. The Great Wall of China is, as the name suggests, a truly great wall. It might be the greatest wall ever built. It stretches across a whopping 15 provinces, spanning from the Bohai Sea to the Gobi Desert. It's 13,000 miles of solid barriers, a single construct that's so big, it's unimaginable. It took a long time to build, around 2,000 years. The very first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, began construction by linking old fortifications and earthworks into a unified line of defense in 220 BC. The wall stands 46 feet tall in some places and rises to elevations of over 4,500 feet. It took an estimated 1 million laborers to complete, and yet despite its immense size, a third of it is gone. Many sections of the wall are destroyed and forgotten. The northern section, the area just studied by researchers, is one of the more ruined. It was built from pounded earth in the 11th century. By pounded earth, I mean it wasn't a tall wall of stone and brick, but rather a massive mound of dirt formed into a barrier. Prior to the recent research, it was assumed the wall here was used to stop the advancement of Genghis Khan's army, but the team discovered several sections where the wall is crisscrossed with access points. The wall may have been used as more of a border crossing than an impervious defense. It was likely used to monitor people moving in and out of the region, and to tax them and their livestock. It's a fascinating discovery because it shows how much we still don't know about this whole area. The wall barely stands here anymore, with little left to understand what the world was like at the northern reaches of China 900 years ago. The world of the North Sea. There is a lost world hidden at the bottom of the North Sea between England and Europe. It's from the days when Britain was connected to Europe by a large landmass. 8,000 years ago, you could walk from the British Isles to Belgium or Scandinavia. It depended where you felt like going. But as the Ice Age came to a definitive end and sea levels rose, the whole area was submerged. Scientists call it Doggerland. Evidence has shown that on the bottom of the North Sea are the remnants of a truly lost civilization from the Stone Age. The first pieces of evidence were found in the early 1930s. A fishing trawler dredged up a spear point used by a primitive hunter. Since then, hundreds of artifacts have been dredged from the bottom of the sea or discovered on the Dutch coastline. Researchers have found deer bones embedded with arrows. They've recovered fossilized hyena droppings and mammoth teeth. They've even found skulls from Neanderthals. There is no doubt that in the vast sea separating England from the mainland, there was once a proud group of humans, both modern humans and our much older relatives like Neanderthals and even more ancient hominids called Homo antecessor. But just how long ago did this world exist? One of the oldest things ever found was a flint tool with a birch tar pitch handle. It was found in 2016 by a nurse walking on the beach. The artifact turned out to be 50,000 years old. The unexplored volcano. Forget about ancient civilizations for a minute while I take you to the rarest volcano in the world. It's only the rarest because it's in one of the most remote places on the planet, and until recently, was unexplored. The volcano is named Mount Michael. It was conquered by National Geographic explorer and expert in volcanism, Dr. Emma Nicholson. She traveled by boat to an uninhabited chain of volcanic islands in the South Atlantic Ocean. It was a perilous voyage full of risk and danger. The expedition took Emma and her team so far from human civilization that if anything had gone wrong, they were basically dead meat, but in the end, the risk was worth it. Emma and her team arrived unscathed at the South Sandwich Islands, located in what's been called the very end of the world. Emma explored icy volcanoes covered in thick layers of ice. One of the more intriguing volcanoes, somehow still covered in snow, even with smoke rising from its top, was Mount Michael. Before Emma laid her eyes on it, no human had ever reached its summit. Emma is no ordinary human. She scaled the beastly volcano with grit and determination. At its top, she found a lost world of boiling lava. At the top of the volcano is the 9th lava lake ever found by scientists. It's a rare anomaly in which magma pours upwards from a reservoir deep inside the mountain, then seethes at the top in a great pool of fiery death. Have you ever seen an active volcano up close? The lost world of the Amazon. The Amazon jungle was once home to a sprawling civilization. In a discovery that shocked the globe, researchers identified a lost world of villages from before 1500 AD in the Amazon rainforest. There are so many ruins here that experts believe up to 1 million people called the jungle home. It's baffling because nobody knows what happened to those 1 million people. They suddenly disappeared. Their villages were deserted and nothing of them remains. How did an advanced civilization crumble, leaving nothing but roaming tribes alive in the deepest parts of the greatest jungle on Earth? The first Europeans who arrived in the Amazon made reports of amazing places. They supposedly came across settlements, larger cities, and could travel by road through the jungle. But in the centuries that followed, these reports were dismissed as false. The prevailing view ever since has been that prior to Christopher Columbus, the Amazon was a pristine wilderness. With the recent decades of deforestation, scientists have been given a glimpse of what the jungle really looked like before Christopher Columbus. It's a bittersweet discovery since the jungle is being eradicated one piece at a time. But with the trees cut down and the land barren, the remains of old settlements have been found using drones and satellites. One of the leading researchers into the lost world of the Amazon is Jonas de Sousa from the University of Exeter. He said that what's been found has changed the scientific understanding of the Amazon. In the deeper jungles, there may have been about 1 million people, but in total, there could have been as many as 10 million people across the Amazon prior to the arrival of Europeans. The most recent satellite images of the Mato Grosso state in Brazil showed 81 ancient sites. The sites include fortified towns and cleared roads through the trees. The team even visited a couple dozen sites to confirm that they were really left over by ancient Amazonians. They only managed to excavate one, but found evidence that it was in use around 1410 AD. This isn't just a lost civilization, it's the very definition of a lost world. 10 million people, and scientists don't know anything useful about them. But they were in the Amazon living in towns 600 years ago. The caverns under West Virginia. There is a secret world underneath West Virginia that will give you nightmares. Beneath Lewisburg are hundreds of feet of interconnected passages filled with stalactites and stalagmites. The limestone caverns really make you feel as if you've entered an entirely different realm, or like you're on your way down to Hades. The place is called Lost World Caverns, and for years, no human had dared enter it. For a long time, the only entrance into the vast cave system was a single hole. Farmers knew about it, but they weren't interested in a hidden world of darkness and tight crevices. They used the hole as a dumping ground. They threw dead livestock into the hole along with their trash. It was only a few decades ago that scientists took an interest in the hole. It turned out to be a vertical shaft going 120 feet below the surface into an impossibly massive chamber. At the bottom of the shaft is a huge cave over 1,000 feet long and 300 feet wide. It's like an underground cathedral. In the 1960s, researchers began to chart the passageways of the system. They found over a mile of interconnected tunnels. They also documented new life and the remains of prehistoric life. In 1967, the bones of a cave bear from the Ice Age were discovered down in the cavern. These days, Lost World Caverns is home to cave crickets and salamanders. There's also a disappearing stream. You can hear the stream moving somewhere in the cave system, but there is no way to see where it goes. It emerges above ground about 8 miles from the cavern. Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
La Motilla de l'Azuer. In the central Iberian Peninsula in the plains of La Mancha, Spain, there is a series of Bronze Age motillas, or artificial mounds, dating back between 2200 BC and 1500 BC. Most are between 13 and 33 feet tall, and the mounds are separated from one another by a distance of roughly 2.5 to 3 miles. They were first mentioned in European literature during the 19th century, and people long believed that the motillas were burial mounds. But this all changed during the 1970s, when excavations began on one of the mounds called La Motilla de l'Azuer. To scholars' surprise, the site turned out to be much more than that. It was a fortified settlement and a necropolis, complete with a stone tower in the middle of a courtyard surrounded by 2 walled enclosures. This town, hidden in a hill, has been around for over 1,000 years, and archaeologists have found evidence of the settlement's walls getting rebuilt over this time span. Besides the necropolis with human remains, archaeologists also found a lot of horse remains, meaning that the locals probably held them in high regard and that they were a huge part of their society. The people lived in dwellings with spaces between them and lots of pits for ovens and storage space. La Motilla de l'Azuer also contains the Iberian Peninsula's oldest known well. Experts believe that the site's enclosures were meant to protect and manage the livelihood of the settlement's residents by keeping their water systems safe, occasionally housing livestock, and serving as places to store and process grains and create pottery. The site is getting restored to open it up to the public, so you can visit this motilla for yourself. Little America. On October 3, 1933, the first American post office in Antarctica was established at a base camp on the Ross Ice Shelf named Little America. Established in 1928 by U.S. naval officer Richard E. Byrd, the settlement even had its own newspaper. It's just one of 5 Little Americas that eventually sprang up in the area, but it is arguably the most iconic. Byrd would return several times on expeditions sponsored by the U.S. government and supported by the U.S. Navy. This curious collection of 5 bases became their own little community of explorers and scientists. In 1933, a postal worker named Charles Anderson was dispatched to Little America's post office and tasked with running its day-to-day operations, but his job there was more symbolic than functional in the long run. As it turned out, the post office was established more or less as an excuse to create a commemorative stamp and cancellation mark for philatelists, a fancy term for stamp enthusiasts. Do people collect stamps anymore? I actually used to, but I have no idea where my collection is. Frivolous as it may seem, the program was wildly successful. Who doesn't want a stamp from Antarctica? People eagerly paid an extra 50 cents to the Byrd Antarctic Expedition for the 3-cent stamp, and somewhere between 150,000 and 240,000 letters were marked. The novelty evidently wore off, however, and the Little America post office closed in 1935. The Little America bases were also ultimately abandoned, and what became of them is somewhat of a mystery. Little America 3, which was established 6 miles north of the base that held the post office, was rediscovered once in 1958 after being buried in snow. But it was once again lost and may have sunk into the Southern Ocean. The final establishment, Little America 5, drifted out to sea with an iceberg in 1987. Trell. Once the largest settlement in medieval Wales, the lost city of Trell existed only in legend until 2005, when a former toll booth worker named Stuart Wilson used his life savings to purchase a plot of land where he thought its ruins could be found. It took Wilson 12 years of digging around on the 4.6-acre plot to come up with any evidence of the 13th century settlement, but all that time and energy was worth it. He found it! After spending over 6 figures in additional costs beyond the price tag of the land itself and enlisting the help of hundreds of volunteers, the man and his helpers had uncovered the remnants of 8 buildings.
Included among them are a moated manor, a round stone tower, and several outbuildings, which once ran alongside the city's market. By the mid-13th century, Trell became an iron production center for an influential family of Norman lords, known as the De Clares, according to Wilson, who spoke with the BBC in late 2016. He claimed that the city had around 10,000 residents at its peak, making it rather sizable for the time, when London boasted a population of 40,000. And, he said, Trell expanded rapidly, stating this population grew from nothing to that size within 25 years. Evidence suggests that the settlement was destroyed in 1296 during a Welsh rebellion. It was rebuilt, with most of the buildings found at the site showing signs of having fallen into ruin by the 15th century and being completely abandoned by 1650, shortly after the end of the English Civil War. A lost city found thanks to this man's persistence. Would you spend 12 years looking for a lost city? Let me know in the comments below. Greenland's eastern settlement. Norse explorers, aka Vikings, from Iceland, founded Greenland's eastern settlement in 986 AD. Its name is slightly misleading, as the site is actually located on Greenland's southwestern tip. Nevertheless, the settlement thrived, reaching between 4,000 and 5,000 residents at its peak. Its economy was based mainly on sheep and cattle farming, and seal hunting largely supplemented the food supply. Fishing also eventually came to play an imperative role in the eastern settlement's economy. The site was abandoned during the early 15th century, with the last known sign of life there being left behind in the form of a written record detailing a wedding in 1408. It survived roughly a century longer than the western settlement slightly to the north, which was deserted around 100 years earlier. Today, there are hundreds of farm ruins, as well as the remnants of 16 churches. The eastern settlement may have declined due to climate change. Evidence indicates that during the 14th century, the demand for winter fodder appears to have increased, while hay production slowed down. Consequently, fishing became more important to economic survival, as isotope analyses of bones found at the site show. Leading up to the 1300s, around 80% of settlers' diets came from agricultural products. But after the turn of the century, somewhere between half and 80% of food came from the sea. Regardless of what caused this shift, it's clear that something serious enough happened to dramatically alter the settlers' way of life. The reasons behind why the eastern settlement was ultimately abandoned are unknown. One possibility is that the island's exports fell in demand, drawing people away from the struggling settlement and back to more centralized Norse communities in places like Iceland, Denmark, and Norway. Stabia. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, destroying the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum and covering them in a blanket of ash. But those just happened to be the most famous cities that fell to the eruption. There were others, including towns and villages like Boscoreale, Oplontis, and Stabia, the latter of which arguably has the strangest story behind it. In 89 BC, during what's known as the Social War, Stabia was destroyed 10 years before the volcanic eruption. All that was left standing was a single farmhouse, according to the writings of Pliny the Elder, and luxury villas offering panoramic views of the landscape were built in place of the ruins. When Mount Vesuvius erupted just a decade later, it completely entombed the glamorous homes in ash. Stabia was discovered during the mid-18th century, around the same time archaeologists found Pompeii. Those participating in the digs chose to focus on Pompeii and reburied Stabia for safekeeping, and perhaps with plans to return to it later. But nobody paid any attention to the site again until a local high school principal went looking for it during the 1950s. It quickly became evident that Stabia was far more important than it was originally given credit for. Dating as far back as the 7th century BC, it served as a bustling commercial and strategic center that reached its peak population in the 10 years leading up to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Excavations are ongoing and have uncovered several magnificent villas thus far, as well as beautiful frescoes, sculptures, and other breathtaking architectural features, proving that even today, there are overlooked archaeological gems just waiting to be discovered. Syria's Dead Cities. Over 700 ancient settlements dating back between the 1st and 7th centuries, during the Roman and Byzantine periods, can be found in northwestern Syria along an elevated limestone area known as the Limestone Massif. Nicknamed the Dead Cities by early European explorers, these remarkably preserved towns and villages contain houses, bathhouses, cisterns, pagan temples, Christian churches, and more. Residents produced wheat, olives, olive oil, grapes, and wine.
The industrious villages peaked between the 4th and 6th centuries, but were abandoned rather abruptly between the 8th and the 10th centuries. Researchers are conflicted as to why the dead city's residents up and left, and numerous factors could be at play. For one, the shifting of trade routes resulting from Arab conquest took business away. Secondly, it appears as though the climate changed, causing the soil to erode, olive trees to die, and the region in general to become barren. It also didn't help the cities were plagued by repeated invasions and warfare from competing forces. Most of the known dead cities were well preserved, easily accessible, and open to visitors before the onset of the ongoing Syrian civil war. Today, the U.S. government advises not traveling to Syria, period, while many travel sites recommend at least relying on a guide to reach the dead cities, if you try to attempt it anyway. Florida's Lost City, deep in the Everglades in far western Broward County and roughly 8 miles south of Interstate 75, also known as Alligator Alley, sits the remnants of Florida's Lost City. The 3-acre site's past is up for debate, but it is known that the property was once home to a large Seminole tribe village that was ultimately abandoned. Rumor holds that somewhere between 30 and 40 Confederate soldiers sought refuge there, only to be slaughtered by the Seminoles. During the 1930s, mobster Al Capone supposedly manufactured moonshine at the site. The part about the Lost City once being a Seminole village is in fact true, while the other stories might be true or might not. Over the years, archaeologists and state wildlife officials have found an array of artifacts, including items of Native American origin, such as a canoe, shacks, and an iron kettle that was once used to distill sugarcane into alcohol, according to South Florida Sun-Sentinel. Many items are hundreds or thousands of years old, while others indicate that the site saw activity during the early 20th century. Seminole Miccosukee Archives Director Patsy West told the Sun-Sentinel in her own words, "What we really think it was, more than anything, was a Prohibition-era bootlegging operation, but everybody who went there came back with a story." West also added that it's possible that the iron kettle was used by the Seminoles, Al Capone, or both. Records show that Capone did indeed own a nearby saloon, adding to the credibility of this seemingly far-flung tale. He was also the only known organized crime connection there. As it turns out, it's also true that Confederate soldiers used the site as a hideout after stealing Union gold, and that they were, in fact, ultimately killed by the Seminoles. It's also possible that there is more history to the Lost City that nobody knows about, and that several Native American groups reused the site over time, according to archaeologist Dave Carr, who dated several artifacts from the site back to somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago. While the Florida State Archives list the Lost City as an archaeological site, there is not much to see there today. It's not marked on any maps, and it's covered in thick, overgrown vegetation. In other words, you have to know precisely what you're looking for to even find it. Akrotiri. Many tourists who visit the scenic Greek island of Santorini are blissfully unaware that it's the site of the second largest volcanic eruption in human history. Known as the Thera eruption or the Minoan eruption, it happened nearly 3,600 years ago during the 2nd millennium BC, burying the Bronze Age Minoan settlement of Akrotiri and other nearby villages in ash, much like the eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii. It is this eruption that some researchers believe led to the legend of Atlantis. Unlike Pompeii's residents, however, the people living in Akrotiri, an outpost of Crete, apparently knew of the impending disaster and fled while there was still time to avoid dying under the rainfall of ash that was to come. Researchers know this based on the lack of human remains found at the site, which sits at the southern tip of Santorini. They also learned, based on the settlement's well-preserved remains, that Akrotiri was highly developed for its time and that it thrived for centuries before succumbing to the eruption. Akrotiri's buildings and artifacts were kept frozen in time by the volcanic matter that buried them, and only one gold item was left behind, suggesting that residents performed a detailed inventory before leaving and took their valuables with them. The port city was an important urban and trade center and was therefore incredibly wealthy. It boasted a sophisticated drainage system, elaborate architecture, and some of the world's first known indoor bathrooms. Because Akrotiri was so highly advanced, some scholars theorize that it represents the city of Atlantis mentioned in Plato's writings. While many, if not most researchers have come to regard Atlantis as a purely mythical place, this explanation is also plausible, especially when considering Plato's words about a great and wonderful empire that was snuffed out of existence. The philosopher wrote, "There occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared into the depths of the sea." Knowing that Akrotiri's residents escaped cast doubt on the possibility that Plato was referring to the settlement in his texts, but the sheer destruction conveyed through his words matches the magnitude of the Thera eruption. At the very least, it's enough to make some experts wonder if maybe, just maybe, Akrotiri is Atlantis, hidden in plain sight. Thanks for watching! Which of these lost cities would you like to visit the most? Which one did you think was the most interesting? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you are new here. See you soon! Bye!